Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to our November MemoryFox webinar. Today we have my friend Geng Wang here. He is from Civic Champs. So I'm so excited to talk about this topic. So today we're talking about volunteer stories. And Geng, I don't know if you know this, but at my last role, I was the director of special events at a nonprofit. So I worked
Ah,
with volunteers all the time. I know I can just think of how much work they did and how important they were to our mission. So yes, volunteer stories, they might be my favorite type of story. Actually, I
yeah,
don't know. I don't know if I can commit to one, but you know, it's pretty high up. It might be number one.
top two at least.
It's
Yeah.
definitely top two. Yeah, so thank you all for coming today. Looks like a lot of people are joining us. I am so excited to do this presentation today. I want to let you all know we are recording, so I will send out the recording afterwards via email. You'll get an email from me with the recording, so please share that out with your team. Let everybody know that they should also watch it. Um, let's see, what else? What else? If you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and save those and ask on those questions at the end, but please don't hesitate to put all your questions in the chat. Um, awesome. And while everybody is coming in, I would love to hear about where you're calling in from, what organization that you are representing. One of my favorite things about these webinars is to see the different missions and the different impact that we're having as a collective group. So go ahead and drop where you are working, what your mission is, where you're calling in from. I'd love to see it. And I also want to let you know that before I kick it over to Gung, if you want to stick around and learn about MemoryFox, we are a nonprofit technology platform that helps nonprofits collect, organize, and share stories directly from your community. And we do that in an ethical way. So if you want to learn more about MemoryFox, please stick around at the end. I'm going to show you kind of a quick demo of how everything works. Okay. So now that I got that all out of the way, I would love to introduce our guest. So Geng Wang is the CEO of Civic Champs, where he leads a team of passionate change leaders to build technology solutions that create a seamless and rewarding volunteer experience for both the volunteers and service organizations. So prior to Civic Champs, Geng co-founded and sold two companies, rentjungle.com, which is an apartment search engine, as well as Community Elf, which is a social media management firm. Geng is also a former McKinsey and Company consultant and is a graduate of Michigan State University and Harvard Business School. And okay, couple answers in the chat. Love to see it. Be more like Claire down in Kansas. Wonderful. Community Culinary School of Charlotte, North Carolina. Oh, that's a really fun one. Wow. Thanks for coming. The Good Plus Foundation, located in New York City and LA. Wow, really great stuff. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. But in the meantime, Gung, I'm going to pass it right over to you. I'm so excited to learn from you today.
Yeah, no, super excited to be here. And yeah, excited to see a fellow Spartan in the chat as well, Lisa. It's good to thanks for the shout out. Yeah, let me share my screen here so before I forget, because I'm always talking about slides that no one can see. And so that can be kind of embarrassing. So let me see if I can share my slides here so you guys can all start to see
It's
that
just
as well.
exciting. You get excited, right?
That's great. Great. Just dive right on in. And they're like, what are you talking about? Where are
Somebody nicely writes in the chat, I can't see your screen. And you're like,
we?
oh,
Yeah, especially like it's confusing initially because you're just like kind of telling the story. And then at some point people are like, I think he's indicating something I can visually see, right? So
I've definitely been there.
yeah. So yeah, so today the topic is going to be around 5 ways to leverage videos and storytelling along the volunteer journey, right? Like Carly, I think volunteer stories are my personal favorite of the storytelling, of course. And so Civic Champs, we're a volunteer management platform. And so, we help people with, waivers, onboarding, hours tracking, scheduling, all of that kind of stuff, right? And so we work with lots and lots of nonprofits across the country. And so a lot of these insights are really from them, right? Some are our customers really, in many ways, you all are oftentimes the true experts. And so this is just compiling some of those insights and lessons learned, if you will. So with that, Carly already gave me an intro, so I'm going to skip this part because it's always weird to talk about yourself anyway. And we'll just dive right on in, right? And so um, we're going to cut this into essentially three parts, right? So we're going to talk about the power of storytelling. Why is it important? Why do you do storytelling? Of course, because it's MemoryFox, we're going to talk about video and how you can use video to engage your volunteers. And then how do you actually integrate all of that, right? And of course, highlighting a little bit of technology in terms of how that might work. Of course, stay on after the presentation to learn more about MemoryFox, right? They're the go-to platform in terms of user-generated videos and really, really awesome, right? So storytelling, I always like to start with like the definition of things, right? Like, what are we talking about? When we say storytelling, what does it mean? And so this is, a pretty standard definition, I would say, right? So nonprofit storytelling is using compelling narratives and stories to convey your mission, your impact, and your values as a nonprofit. And it involves usually sharing some sort of personal or emotional account of the work that's being done. Perhaps it talks about your beneficiaries, the challenges faced, and the positive change that you're making as a nonprofit. And the goal at the end, why are we even doing this? Is we're doing storytelling so that we can connect with our, in this case, it says audience, but really our constituents, right? And stakeholders on a deeper level. Oftentimes, storytelling is a way that we communicate that's much more interesting for people, right? It helps bring our communities together. You often think about even as family units, right? There's these stories that you tell that bring, it's like this memory you have, and if you really think about it, that's like in many ways what makes your family, right? Is those shared collective stories and memories. And even if you're joining a family, right? Like understanding, knowing those stories is kind of what makes you part of the family, right? Like, oh, did you ever hear like da da da, right? Like dad told this stupid story every time. um and again, much more memorable than statistics, right? Not that you shouldn't use statistics as well, right? But it's a great complement. And so one of the key things I like to highlight, right from the get-go for nonprofits is that to come back to your mission again and again and again, right? And I say this because oftentimes when we're doing storytelling or we're doing any sort of marketing, really, um, you forget that most people are not as aware of your mission and what you do, right? And we always tend to undersell those elements of our organizations, right? And that's true for companies as well, right? Like once you're in there, it's hard not to assume that everyone already kind of knows what you do and the benefits you bring versus in reality, that's almost never true, right? And I'll give a, this is maybe this is just because I was less aware than others. Many of you are probably more aware, but I joined the board of a United Way about 5 years ago, right? And I'll be honest, I had heard of the brand because it's United Way, but I had no idea what they did. I didn't even know that they raised money from companies. Like the core thing that everyone knows, I didn't even know what, I was like, that's interesting. Like it's a campaign. Okay, that's like the primary thing. And then you get the money out to nonprofits. But I feel like part of that is because when the brand's out there, oftentimes the story that you hear isn't about that, right? It doesn't bring back like, oh, why is that important? What is it that we're trying to do in our community? And oftentimes it's a little bit vague and high level as well, versus like what stories can really do is bring those missions to life, right? And so something to think about as you're thinking about storytelling videos that you're making is how do you tie it back to your mission every time, right? So if there's nothing else to take away, I would just take away that, you can drop off the rest of the webinar and call it a day. But if you're going to continue with us, so what makes a good story? And there's lots of different arcs, if you will. Some of you may have seen the hero's journey. That's a very classic storytelling arc. This is probably a little bit of a simpler model, if you will, right? Which is like you start with a strong beginning, like a attention capturing moment, right? Then you have some sort of tension, right? Like something has to be interesting, right? Like people have to be a little anxious, right, in some way, and then you sort of resolve and have a strong ending to your story, right? And so an example might be if you look at, this is from McKinsey and Company is where we're citing this, but one of the author of the Dragonfly Effect, which looks at how social media can drive customer relationships, oftentimes, organizations will tell you about a situation, X happened, Y happened, Z happened, but instead, what you want to do instead of going from X, Y to Z, sort of chronological, a good story often takes Y, the middle part of the story, and creates tension or conflict, where that reader or the audience is drawn into the story. What's going to happen next, right? And so think about, instead of just telling the chronological, right? Like how do you keep people like guessing a little bit? All right. And so what are the common story archetypes? And so for us, we think about 4 different types of stories. There's a who am I story, basically like how did I get started? There's a vision story, what are we going to do in the future? There is a apology and recovery story. It's like, oh, there's some transgression that happened, and how are you going to respond to it? This is kind of the PR story, if you will. It can also be in the future, doesn't have to be funny, but often it is funny, right? Like, oh, remember when, right? And then we did this other thing, like ha ha ha. Now it's kind of funny, right? But those can be like a way to introduce like learning, right? Like it's basically like how are we as an organization growing, learning, and getting better, right? In addition to perhaps the actual apology piece of it. And then there's the personal story, right? And that's probably the most classic story in terms of volunteer stories that you come, right? Is that like the personal impact piece, right? And I think you don't have to be famous or have like a big audience to tell stories, right? A lot of times, uh, authenticity, I think, is what really gives stories their power. And so the key thing there, right, is you have to believe in the story yourself, right, for it to be effective. And so as you're thinking about like what story we're going to tell, like try not to think about like what story is I mean, you need to keep your audience in mind, like this has to be interesting for them, but you also have to believe as well in the story, right? Otherwise, it's not going to come off as well, right? So, all right. So examples of some of these, right? So crafting a who I am story. Here's like a screenshot, right? This is where oftentimes, your mission, vision, and the values page might be here. And gives your volunteers a sense of, who you are, what you do, and what you believe, right? The vision story, it's more longer term. And so it talks about like, hey, what do we want? What is the vision of the future that we want to provide? This is from the Education Partnership, and so this is their vision of the future. They talk about how their ability to increase awareness, right, of environmental sustainability opportunities, right, et cetera, how much recycling they do, their certifications, right, and what they want to do in the future. And then the apology story, right? This is, again, I couldn't find a great example of this necessarily in the time, but this is a similar to that, right? Which is this is a animal shelter, and they're basically saying, hey, there's scams that are targeting owners of lost pets, right? And they're not really, they're not apologizing on behalf, right? But it's a little bit of public awareness, but it is a way to storytelling can be a powerful way to convey this, obviously, right? So as Carly will highlight, ethical storytelling is important, right? So that story of someone being scammed obviously has to be their story that they're sharing and be comfortable with it. But if you do have that, right, like that's a great way to actually make people realize the impact, right, and why they should care about this, right, and what to watch out for, as opposed to maybe a little bit more dry, like, oh, here, like by the way people might be trying to scam you, right? And then there are the personal stories. And this, like I said, this is kind of the bread and butter of most volunteer-oriented storytelling. And so this is your individual volunteers talking about why it matters to them, right? And so on the left, right, this is an example from Arthur, right? And sort of, you know, he's super grateful for the opportunity because he's been able to learn about, you know, people's histories and their backgrounds, and then sort of educate himself. This is a shop volunteer, Reggie, right? And Reggie's, you know, talking about her story here as well, and in terms of why she volunteers at her organization, right? And also the benefits, right? Like it's actually only, I think, 1, 2, 3 sentences, right? But like it actually conveys quite a bit, right? In terms of, you know, Reggie, it's, you know, the benefit she's getting, you know, why she's volunteering here, the impact, right? And a bunch of things, right? So, all right. And so how do you become a better storyteller? Case example 1, I'm not doing a great job. You should have a better story arc. So first, you should put the audience first, right? And so rather than telling stories that simply talk about the logic and the benefits, right? Think about what does your audience want, right? What are they here to hear about? Why did they care, right? Um, I'm not adding a lot of tension today, is I guess what I'm thinking. The second thing is to bridge the gap, right? So you have to share a narrative that takes people, right, the audience from, you know, where, you know, their current understanding, where they're at, and where you want to take them, right? And think about like, what is it that, where is that gap happening? And sometimes it can be quite helpful to actually talk to your volunteers, if you're recruiting other volunteers or talking to other constituents to get an understanding of like where might people have misunderstandings around your organization, right? So going back to United Way, right? Like had the ED or somebody interviewed all the board members and be like, hey, when did you hear about us? What did you know about United Way beforehand, right? And my story, right, around like, hey, I actually didn't know anything about you guys. That would have come through. And then as you're thinking about what stories to tell, that can educate you in terms of what is it that it's like, oh, I never realized Geng, or, you know, and if there's one of me, I'm sure there's lots of me around in the community. And so now you can target and tailor your story to understand, you know, what is that gap and how do I sort of bridge that gap? Doke. And then bringing the story to life. So having a, and this sometimes takes practice, right? But thinking about the emotional journey of your audience, right? And making the story feel, you know, understanding, you know, what are those emotional arcs and how do you hit the right notes, right? And that generally I find takes a bit more practice and time. But one of the things I want, you know, I'll probably repeat this later too, is to consider the fact that you don't have to do it right 100% from the get-go, right? And it's okay, actually, like, oh, Geng told me you know, you have to hit the emotional points. Well, I don't even know what emotional points my audience, right? And then instead of, you know, don't let that like freeze you in action and not tell your stories, right? Or to do your videos. But this is, you know, this is more of a like, how would I get better, right? Just like where we're all working on our craft, so to speak. Um, I think the other piece, again, I'll sort of come back to what I said earlier. One of the things to bring the story to life is to be authentic, right? And maybe a little bit vulnerability, right? To draw in your audience, and they're like, oh, this is another human being. You know, I can relate to that, right? They're having similar struggles that I have, right? All right. So the next part here, right? So leveraging video for volunteer engagement. And so how do you actually use video in terms of your storytelling arc and engaging your volunteers? So video is important, right? A lot of you might already know this. These are just some fun stats. So 91% of consumers want to see more online videos from brands. And so from nonprofit perspective, in many ways, you are, for many volunteers or constituents, you're another brand that they engage with, right? One that has lots of great social impact and very positive, but another brand. And so this also applies. And 57% of Gen Z viewers use short form videos to discover things. So thinking about, I think Carly has a TikTok as well. So if you haven't followed Carly on TikTok, check it out. But using short form video, right? Obviously, we know how addictive TikTok can be. But it's a great way to potentially engage a new audience in short videos, right? It can be a nice forcing mechanism in terms of conveying your story in a compact way, right? And then 75% of adults, right, again, not surprising, watch short form video on our phones. And then we consume a ton of video each week now, 17 hours of content each week. So if you don't have video, right, you're not getting in front of folks in what is arguably their preferred mode of communication or content discovery and content consumption, right? And this, by the way, this is from HubSpot. And so we'll have, when we send out the slides, you'll see in the lower left where we have the source for things. And if you click on it, it'll actually take you to the full article for folks that like to click in and understand things a little bit more deeply. And so the benefits of video, right? So video can improve user engagement. When you tell your story through video, it engages your viewers' visual and audio senses and invokes emotions. It puts you in a position to trust your audience. And when a video is memorable and resonates with your audience, it's often shared with others, right? And thereby extending your reach to additional prospects and future, future supporters of yours, right? I think the other thing that video can really do for you is boost your SEO and website ranking. So SEO stands for search engine optimization. And as we all do, right? One of the first things we're doing when we're searching for something is you go to Google and you look for a keyword, right? Increasingly, you might, for certain folks, maybe going into ChatGPT and searching right there. But when you're searching for that, Google needs a way to highlight who is interesting and has good content or has interesting information for that search. And so video is often placed higher than other content types. And because Google knows that it's more engaging, people are more likely to find it of value. And so oftentimes, even when you search something that has like YouTube links, right, you'll see those are actually, there's this whole bar of videos that come pretty close to the top, right, of your search results, before even a bunch of the other articles that show up later, right? And then the other thing that you can do with video is we do these webinars pretty regularly. And one of the things that we started doing is taking the transcript for these videos and posting that on the website as well. And so what that does, it gives Google and its robots a way to understand the content of your video more deeply, right? So they can find those keywords, right? So everything in your conversation that you have or the presentation or in the video, right, can be found in the transcript, and that gives Google a better sense of what to rank you for, right? So that can be a nice way to leverage your videos too. All right, and then of course, right, in terms of using video effectively, we talked about this, right? Understanding your audience's interests, like why, what is it that they're searching for? Analytics can be helpful here. So if you're using Google Analytics, you can see what search terms people are landing on that's driving the most traffic to you, especially when they're looking at a video or they're looking at a particular article, what took them there, right? From where and what words took them there. And so you can, as you're thinking about future videos, you can take that into account. Right? And that also helps you with finding the right topics. in terms of what you want to talk about, right? One of the interesting things that you can do here, again, thinking about using Google as a tool, is that when you search for a term, like let's say you have a popular term that that you're like, oh, people really like this content, right? Like they loved when we explained how we house, the animals that we receive as for lost pets, right? And we had this great video, and here's all the terms that people are searching for, and they're coming to our site because Google thinks we're great. If you take that, maybe one of those search terms and you put it in Google, oftentimes you will notice that it has recommended searches, right? And recommended topics as well. And so you could do, from in terms of like, what do you do next? That could be an interesting like thought starter as well. So you could say, oh, people that look for this and find interest in this are also interested in these other 10 things. And maybe we'll do something that's kind of similar, right? That where that is relevant to our organization. So if you think about volunteers, right? So maybe you showed up for volunteering in East Lansing, Michigan, right? And people are arriving because you have some article about like how you can volunteer in East Lansing, and other search terms are like Michigan State volunteering or something like that. And so maybe your next video content could be around students from the local college, right? And you title it, and so it helps you rank for that as well, right? Now that's not the only reason you do videos, just to get higher rankings are on search, right? But it's just something to keep in mind, and another benefit as well. Of course, right? Videos are interesting because it's highly visual, right? And so feel free to use visual aids, charts, right? Graphs, things like that to sort of liven up the presentation. And so for us here today, right, we're just using these little clip arts, right, to hopefully make it a little bit more interesting than if it was just text on a slide. Right. Editing, right? So we talked about this earlier. People generally like shorter content, keep it under 5 minutes. I would actually argue that Carly's probably way more of the expert here, right? But under 2, maybe even under 1 minute is ideal. Some quick, snippy little things, right, are I think easy to consume, and people don't feel like, oh, I don't want to watch this whole thing, so I'm going to skip it altogether, right? So the faster and quicker you can have it, I think the more powerful it is. Again, these are tips to get better. Don't make editing the thing that holds you back from publishing, right? I always tell our team, right, because we're a startup, that I much rather we put something out there, even if it's not like great, then we can edit it and make it better. Or if it's totally bad, we can always remove it, right? But we learn something from that process anyway. Versus like if we always hold ourselves until it's absolutely perfect, then oftentimes you're actually learning slower, right? So you're not getting the reps in, and by the way, a lot of folks are missing out on that content that you could that they probably would have enjoyed and gotten value from, but because we held it back, that they're not getting, right? And and I guess one last thought there is the oftentimes less editing does come off as more authentic, right? So that's something to keep in mind too. All right. So integrating storytelling across the volunteer journey. So this is what we think about the sort of volunteer life cycle, right? From recruitment, onboarding, to scheduling, engagement, retention, and reporting, right? These are all sort of the tasks that you as a nonprofit have to do when you're engaging your volunteers. And I think there's lots of different ways to engage folks across the entire spectrum, right? And you might think that like, oh, well, like, what about like scheduling? How do I incorporate storytelling into my scheduling, right? That seems difficult. And so even there, I would argue that there's elements that you can do. And one of them is, for example, I use a soup, tomato soup can image quite a bit. But basically, if you think about when you're scheduling an event, imagine instead of if you're doing like We're getting close to Thanksgiving, right? So there's going to be lots of food drives, lots of toy drives, lots of diaper drives, and we're all going to bring clothes into these kind of big-ish bins, right? And then we're going to feel good because we contributed. Maybe we cleared out our pantry, and that's also a win, right? And we're more organized as people now, and it's going to a good cause. Great. That's like from an emotional standpoint pretty low in terms of the connection I've made to whichever organization I happen to be donating to, right? So like I probably don't even remember, I can't remember which organization we did the food drive with. Like I have no idea actually. Right now I'm thinking about it, or the toy drive. It was just a box that we had. Um, but imagine instead, you say, if it's in person, even better. But even if it's just a bin, you say, hey, I want, for this food drive, what we want to do is we ask you to bring maybe your favorite item from the holidays. Right? You can bring other stuff too, but we'd love to have like one of your favorite items from the holidays that's like donation appropriate. And when you get there, maybe you have a little post-it, and you can share just like, why is this item important to you? Right? It's your favorite for a reason. I use tomato soup because when it's cold, I lived in South Dakota, right? It's very snowy, right? And tomato soup warm, right? I can see it, right? I can taste it, I can visualize it, but that's my favorite during the one of the favorite things like during the holidays is having tomato soup because it reminds me of like very happy memories during the holidays, right? And you all have probably different things. Maybe it's a can of beans because your grandma made casserole and that was the brand she loved, or whatever it is, right? But now from an emotional standpoint, you've really connected with folks, right? And you're collecting a ton of stories, right? And maybe you can reach back out to that person if there's a way to contact them. But even if you don't, right? If it's in person, even better, right? Then people can share. You can take your iPhone out and maybe ask if it's okay to record some of those conversations and sharing of those stories. But even if it's not in person, right? Like now that experience is so much more emotional, and you're probably much more likely to remember like who it was that you were doing this for, right? Because you're like, oh yeah, this is so cool. Like these guys, this is such a neat thing. And by the way, now I associate not just donating food, but I'm donating a memory, right? I'm donating an experience to another family, right? And so that's much more powerful, right? And that's, I think, the power of storytelling, right? A little bit more tactical. Next, right, is where can you share your stories? So there's a bunch of places here like LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, etc. Each platform is sort of built for different types of sharing, different audiences. Instagram is probably actually a less younger audience now, a little bit more generic, I would say, than even before. Facebook, obviously, older. Groups are interesting, right? Like that's kind of, you can build a community still there. Twitter or X, right, is it's probably, I would say for a lot of nonprofits, probably less helpful unless you're a national brand, right? It's not really like community oriented, but sort of, more of a national conversation, if you will. But the one I think people really miss out on is LinkedIn. And I say this because of all the different social platforms, there's only one that's built for recruiting, right? And we think about that usually for careers and jobs. But really, if you're talking about volunteers, right, you're also recruiting them. And there's actually a platform that's built for recruiting that you can use, right? And so LinkedIn, I think, is really interesting. And even LinkedIn is sort of acknowledging this, right? They have a whole section around volunteerism, right, that you could put on your resume because it's such an important part. And so the place is it's very natural. You can cut through a lot of the noise here, because again, I think a lot of nonprofits aren't taking advantage, right? You're going to actually be more visible than others there, right? Another one to think about as a social platform is actually Nextdoor, right? So there's, for the same reason why Twitter is less good as a platform is why Nextdoor is good as a platform, because it is hyper local. And most of when we talk about volunteers, we're not volunteering, across state lines for the most part, right? Like, yeah, maybe you do some filmmaking because of the elections, but for the most part, we're all volunteering in our local communities for you all as local nonprofits. And so Nextdoor is where you're going to find all of those volunteers for the most part, right? Is that in that local community. And so whether you're promoting an event, whether you're trying to recruit more volunteers, or again, whether you're just sharing like a positive story, Nextdoor is a great place. And in part because like Nextdoor has such a mixed reputation, we'll just say, right? And some of it is very negative, right? People complaining about XYZ thing. But I know Nextdoor itself acknowledges that's can be an issue, and they want it to be a very positive environment. And so if you're sharing positive content, right, Nextdoor is going to be incentivized to encourage, right, people to view and to rank that higher and all those other things as well, right? Because it's good for their brand. So food for thought. All right, and so a couple examples again of what this might look like. We have a little bit of time, but it's okay. You can, we don't have to. You guys can play the story, but you can have. This is an example. Next step today. This is Kyle, but he's sharing a story about how showcasing the impact of your work, right? And so you could have a kind of a hosting that on YouTube here, and you can have a story there around your impact, right? You can also have stories around educational content, right? And so you can talk about complex issues, share success stories, or highlight the impact, right? And so this is from ALS, and there, you can see that the background here is actually a clinical, right? You're in a doctor's office, and so you can use videos to convey things in a way that's harder to digest as just reading, right? Because it's especially something that's medical. The terminology is hard and long, right? But having a video can kind of humanize the experience and make it resonate a bit more. Unique challenges. Trying hands in turn. And so if this is a post from one of our animal shelters that we work with. Animals, of course, great. Like animal shelters have a huge advantage because everyone wants to see animal pictures, videos, etc. But you can also have videos that talk about unique challenges that actually you face as an organization, and they could be lighthearted, right? Or you can use it to actually highlight real issues, right? And that might be a way to, from an appeals standpoint, you can leverage video to drive donations in that way too. And then behind the scenes is really great. So this is Habitat for Humanity, right behind the scenes. What does it look like? Like, what do you do? Like, how does this actually work? And this is like fun, pretty interesting, right? This is the same reason people watch shows like what's that called? The Mystery Boss one, right? Like where you like pretend you're not the boss and you show up to work.
Undercover Boss.
Undercover Boss. That's right. Yeah. Right, it's like very similar, right? So you're getting like, and you can see, a lot of the Netflix specials, whether that's Colorado, with football, or it's Michael Jordan's biopic, right? Around their championship run, right? Like people love these like behind the scenes videos, right? So, and by the way, it makes it's the other benefit, like it says on the slide, is it builds trust with folks. They're like, oh, I get it. Like you're showing, you're pulling back the curtains, right? And I can see you're very transparent, and I can see exactly what's happening behind the scenes. Oh no, I clicked on it. That was not what I meant to do. All right, so let's go back to full screen. But again, yes, all of the slides, they're clickable. So if you click on the video, it'll actually take you to the video. So we try to make sure that you have all the content here. Okay. And then last but not least, here is calls to action, right? So videos can communicate really well, calls for action. So this is Lynchburg Daily Bread. They're asking for volunteers. This is actually a snippet that the local TV station actually aired for them. But you can have these little video segments, right, that can showcase and very visually, right, like why, what you need and why you need it, right? And so, you can, pan from like, oh yeah, we, look, we long lines, or maybe, hey, we have just the, like a scene of a like the holiday decorations to make sure people, evokes that emotion of, oh, it's that time of year, right? And so it's easy to convey that in like 3 seconds, right? Versus like a long, it's the time of year, it's the holidays, and da 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 da. Like, oh my gosh, it'll take forever to read, right? So now, with all video content, right? I think it's always important to remember that um, there's an element of being ethical in telling these stories, right? And so I won't dig into this. This is Carly and MemoryFox's, sort of specialty here in terms of ethical storytelling. Really, really recommend folks take a look at the report. I think in this case, the link, if you click here on this image, it actually takes you to Carly's webinar that she did with us that talks about ethical storytelling, the learnings that they had. So encourage people to check that out if you have a chance, and we recorded that as well, right? So with that, I think that's sort of the bulk of our presentation. So we can dive into Q&A here real shortly, but right before we do that, just in case folks are interested, Civic Champs, we're, like I said, volunteer management software. And so in terms of storytelling, or what we do, there's a couple things, right? So one, this is our mobile app. We have mobile kiosks, etc. But one of the more interesting things we have is this mobile app that allows you to do easily check-ins, scheduling, and things like that. But my favorite piece actually is this ability to collect feedback and reflections from volunteers. It helps you with retention, because if someone's upset with you, you want to know that. And a lot of times they're not going to tell you in person, because that's like a high bar, right? Like me coming up to Carly and be like, Carly, I actually had a terrible time. I know you put a lot of time and effort into this event and you worked so hard, but like it kind of sucked for me. And like that's a high bar. Like no one wants to do that, right? But if you give them this opportunity to share their voice, and on just like a quick feedback, they can quickly type something and say like, hey, like the idea of this event was great, but like I personally unfortunately didn't have a great time because blah 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 blah, right? And that's great for you to know, because otherwise you just wouldn't know that, right? And now you can reach back out to them, make sure they, you can change things, at least make them feel heard, right? And then on the flip side, right, if someone's really happy, right, this is a testimonial a lot of times that you might be able to leverage in the future. You can ask them for permission. But also, if you're thinking from a donation standpoint, these are the folks that maybe you actually have an targeted appeal for, right? That thanks them for their gift of time, tells them how else they can support you all financially, right? But these are the folks you want to ask. Obviously, you don't want to ask anyone, sort of on the left here with sort of the frowny face. Right? So I think that's really interesting. We're gonna potentially do something with MemoryFox on video as well in the future, so we'll see. Stay tuned. And then, of course, right, you can see all of this feedback on the back end, and you can kind of reach back out to folks, right? So I thought, that at least that part of our platform could be relevant in terms of our conversation today. So, all right, hopefully that was helpful to folks. But yeah, we'll open it up to Q&A, and if folks want to stay in touch, I'd love to hear from you.
Okay, wow. Yeah, I think that was so helpful. I would love, if anybody has questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Geng, I have a few questions for you though, if you want to chat with me for a minute. But
Yeah, of course.
okay, great. So I loved your example where you were talking about maybe actually, I don't remember the wording exactly, but you said that there's always room for like an apology, right? Or for a acknowledging that maybe something didn't go the way that you thought it might.
Mm,
I
mm.
think sometimes as fundraisers, we have these big goals and maybe we don't hit them all the time. And I guess what are your thoughts on maybe sharing? you know, maybe this is why something didn't work out, but you know, here's how we're going to change that for the future. I like that you brought that up. What did do you have any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the value of doing that in video versus an email, right, is that it's going to feel more authentic and it's going to feel more real to
Yeah.
somebody. I think that's probably the biggest difference, right? Like you could send an email, right? And people get it, and then the message is actually the same, right? We did this and it worked, and here what we're gonna do next. And people are like, oh, great, no, good job, good kudos to you, right? Um, but a video, right, like that, your facial expression, um, and again, that's why it's video is also very hard to fake. And so if you're not authentic, people can see through it. And so you, yeah, cautionary tale, right? But if you're able to authentically believe in sort of that apology, or like, hey, here's what we're going to do next, I'm truly genuinely excited. There's no way you can share that excitement or that faith and conviction better than in a video versus like any sort of printed material, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, yeah, and I think sometimes, you know, we have to just be willing, like if there was some sort of maybe, especially when it comes to like the ethical storytelling side of things, like if you made some sort of mistake and you want
Mm,
to maybe retract something, or you want to rephrase something, or you
yeah,
want to just let people know, like we're listening, we're learning, like I think just letting your audience, like being upfront in through a video with your audience, that
yeah,
is a really great way to connect with them. So I love that you brought that
right.
example up.
Yeah, it'll just feel well, and I think, well, if it's a true apology, right? That's why, I mean, this is why the celebrities all do it, right?
Right.
It's like it's got so much more power from a like, oh, they must actually mean, because it's vulnerable, right? Like you're putting yourself out there in a way that, like a text isn't going to do, right?
Yeah. So, well, similarly to that, but not a little bit pivoting here, but um, so you bring up celebrities, right? So that you do see that a lot of celebrities will post videos about certain things, and you know, we do often question if those might be authentic or not, because they're of course
Hmm.
a lot of times they're people with experience in acting and stuff like that.
Right.
But I think that one of the greatest things about nonprofits is that they have real stories all the
Yeah.
time at their fingertips. And they don't have to manufacture a story. You don't have to
Right.
make up something that represents your mission, because you have, you know, stories at your
Yep.
fingertips all the time. And you see more and more often for-profit companies are doing things where they're creating videos that look like they're captured in real time, or they are
Right.
authentic, and they're doing that to look more like authentic content, right? And
Yep.
we know that they're not, or we know that they obviously produce that, but um I think I think sometimes when it comes to video story, that's a long way for me to say. I think sometimes when it comes to nonprofit video storytelling, we get nervous about starting, about giving it a try.
Hmm.
But you have stories at your
Mm.
fingertips. You have volunteer stories, you have
Yes.
board member stories, staff stories, you have all these things. And sometimes you just got to get started.
Yeah. So in a prior life, right, I had a social media management agency, and so we served a pretty broad range, and we sort of rode the wave of when social media became, more relevant to businesses. And but we had nonprofits in our portfolio, right, of clients that we served. And I would say you're absolutely right. It was so, as a professional right then, it was so much easier to come up with content and stories and things that were interesting to share for our nonprofits than it was for like, you know, we serve like restaurants and like car dealerships, and they're like, yeah, like, okay, here's another like video of a F-150 doing cool stuff, right, or whatever it was. Like that's, you can find opportunities, but in terms of like interesting things that, that emotionally connect, right? Like nonprofits, it's even if, I would say like a crappy video is going to beat the crap out of, any, a polished video that a restaurant's going to do, right? Because it's just going to be inherently more interesting.
Yeah. And you also you mentioned like so this is sort of like how you mentioned the behind the scenes videos too, right? Like so at a nonprofit, you might think your job isn't that interesting or that fun or
Yeah.
that maybe you don't think you personally make much of an impact. I don't know. I'm not speaking for anybody in particular or any department in particular. But I would say if you happen to think that about your position, maybe you might not realize the interesting decisions that you make that make an
Mm,
impact, or the daily work that you have to do in order to keep the nonprofit running. Like those are things that people, you said you weren't really super aware with how the United Way works, right? So
mhm,
sometimes just asking your own staff members, what was like a difficult decision you've had to make this year? And how has that how do you wish maybe we could change that in the future? And that might bring in a donor that says, oh, I know, a strategy
yeah.
that with that. I know how to make them able to make, I'm not sure exactly what that might look like, but I think that you were exactly on point when you said behind the scenes stories. They have such an impact
Mm.
on people.
Yeah, right. Because, and again, it's that trust building piece, and so like a donor, when I give you money, I want to know that it's going to a good spot, it's doing good work, and even if I believe the statistics, a video can really make that come to life, and like, oh yeah, now I really believe the statistics, right? That like, oh, you are doing good work, and here's like an example. Even if I know it's produced, right? It's an anecdotal example of like exactly how you make my money, drive impact, right?
Right. And maybe it's something as simple as when your volunteer comes in for, maybe they're doing like a couple hours of work in your office and you say, what's a day in the life of a volunteer look like? I park my car at this time, I come in and I sign in, and then I do, this type of email work. And those things might be interesting
Yeah,
for recruiting because people might say, hey, I can do stuff like that. Maybe I should look into that. And then, of course, the important part is do that call to action and make sure they have a way to sign up
sure.
and
Yeah.
actually make those next steps, right?
And it's without being a special recognition of that volunteer or your volunteers generally, the fact that you have the video at all is already signaling that you value and you're recognizing their contributions, right? And so when I'm watching that as a potential volunteer, I'm like, oh, these people actually care about what we do, right? Like they made a video about
Yeah,
it.
and like their volunteers get to really do good work. Like they get to really get in there, or yeah, like you were saying about the feedback, right? Maybe
Yep.
the feedback is I really felt like I helped somebody today. And then you say to them, "Hey, would you mind saying that on video and maybe tell me a little more about that?"
Right. Yeah, 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 yeah. Right. That's that. Yeah, I think I'm very proud of that feature that we have.
I think that's great. Well, I will say I haven't seen any other questions come through except several people while you were presenting said, "Will the slide deck be shared with me?" And the answer is yes. So we will share the slide deck. We'll share the recording. Um, a lot of people ask that, which means they want to click on those videos. They want to look at those links. They are ready to, deep dive. Maybe send it to your teammate. Send the recording to your teammate. But unless, Gun, do you have any final thoughts before I
No,
hop into MemoryFox stuff?
no. Yeah, MemoryFox is awesome. You guys should stay and watch for that. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on today. It was a pleasure, and hopefully the presentation was helpful.
I think it was wonderful. Like I said at the top of the hour, I love volunteer stories. I think volunteers have some of the best stories. People volunteer for a reason, right? They have passion. They want to learn about your mission. They want to help nonprofits. It's really good fit to for video storytelling in particular. So thank you so much for joining us today. If anybody wants to stick around, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. I'm gonna just tell you a little bit about how MemoryFox works. So if anybody is interested, I'm gonna pull up my screen in just a minute here. I gotta do the same thing. I gotta figure out, which view, get it in the right, uh, the right view to look, and then of course share the right screen. It's such a process. Okay, I'm gonna do that, and I'm going to share my screen. Share that. All right. Okay. So I've got my screen over here for you. So yes, if you are if okay, here we go. So if you are somebody that's interested in learning more about nonprofit storytelling, I'm going to give you a quick overview today, but I'd love for you to set up a time with our team. I always like to start off with this question, and that is, if somebody asks, what is your mission? Can you show them? Because I know if you work at a nonprofit, you have probably practiced your mission over and over again. You can say it like the back of your hand. Anybody says, what do you do for work? You know exactly your mission. But the real question is, do you have the visuals to convey your mission in a compelling way? And I would say if you're answering no, then I would like to say, what exactly do you think is stopping you? And when we talk to nonprofit professionals like you, we find that there are four major pain points. Number one, collecting content from your community can feel like you're pulling teeth. It can be really hard to ask. Number two, organizing content is frustrating and time consuming. So I think we've all been in a position before where things are just, not where you thought they were going to be saved, and it's been very hard to find things, and therefore it's sort of frustrating. Three would be we need a more efficient and modern way to share our story. Gung talked a lot about social media today. So, for example, you might need an easier way to get your content to social media. Number four, I struggle with collecting community stories ethically. So here at MemoryFox, we actually came up with a technology solution that really addresses all of these pain points. So we have a three-step process. I'm going to do a quick overview of each step today. And I'm going to let you know how, each step is going to help you save your time and actually your money. But I do want to say that before we get into the actual how the collect, organize, and share works, I do want to recognize that I know nonprofits have been given this impossible task of competing in the attention economy while also remaining true to ethical standards for authenticity and storytelling. So that was a little bit what Gung and I were just talking about. For-profit companies are able to fake it, but the good news is for nonprofits, you don't have to because you have authentic, real stories to share. And if you're doing that ethically, those are some higher standards for you, but we can help you get there. And we actually know this to be true because in the ethical storytelling report, we found that 58% of people said that they actually struggle with wanting to collect stories from their community while doing no harm. So we know that nonprofit professionals like you are feeling this way. Maybe you're here today because you feel that way. And I just want to let you know you're not alone. There's a lot of people that are looking for ways to make sure that they're telling stories while maintaining the dignity of their communities. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the process of MemoryFox. So when you become a MemoryFox storyteller, you are able to generate campaigns and send it directly to the person you want to collect the content from. So that could be your volunteers, it could be your program participants, your board members, your staff members, your donors, really anybody. And the way that it's going to manifest is as a QR code or a link. So if you do want to scan that QR code, you can see how it works in real time. You can scan it on your phone and submit, a fun family photo or maybe a dog or cat photo, just to see how it works. But the really cool thing about the collection process is that there's no download or login required for your community member. We also do help you capture consent up front, as well as manage your consent. That could include, consent removal if people are ever in the position where they want to retract their story. That's something we offer. And then finally, in terms of the consent or in terms of the collection process, after someone submits their story, it's going to redirect right back to your website. So if your next ask wants to be a donation, it could be to tell you more about a program. Whatever that might look like, people are able to redirect right back to your website. In terms of organizing, once your community members submit your videos, photos, and your written testimonials to you, it's going to populate into your MemoryFox story bank, which looks like this screenshot here. It's going to automatically sort by the most recent content at the top, but you also can sort it in whatever way makes more sense for you at your organization. So you can tag your content by maybe program, maybe by event, department, use. You also can bulk upload all of your existing content. So if you want it all in one place, there is a way that you can do that. And finally, we do offer unlimited storage when it comes to your organization process. So we don't ever want people to feel like you need to choose which stories to use or which stories to upload. It's unlimited storage. In terms of sharing, we also have several ways that you can now take your videos, photos, written testimonials, and actually share them. So when you use our share tools, you're able to turn that content into really compelling collateral, social media posts, maybe your annual report. Some ways that we help you do that is we do have our own video editor in the platform. We also have a story builder, so you can make shareable web pages that you also can embed into your own website. One great thing that we offer is that you can always download the high quality original submission. So when that person submitted the photo to you, it was in a high quality form, and you're going to be able to download it in that form. So if anybody has ever received a photo via text message or email, and maybe it came through as a thumbnail or it came through blurry, that is something that you can completely avoid by using MemoryFox. And then finally, we also are integrated with Canva. So any photos or videos that get submitted to your MemoryFox Story Bank actually automatically goes to your Canva account. So you can just drag it and drop like this GIF is showing here. And that is like such an easy way that you can quickly use your content, put it into your templates you already have. You can add your logo. It's very easy to do. And additionally, I want to talk a little bit about the ethical storytelling features that we do have here at MemoryFox. So number one is that we offer an equitable pricing model. And that really is because we believe that every nonprofit has great stories to tell. So we want to find a price point that will work for you. Next is consent. And that, like I mentioned earlier, every time you send out a campaign, you have the option to put that consent built into your campaign. So people can really say, I agree to have you tell my story. We also, and it's fully editable. So you can let them know where you're planning to share the story and any other considerations that you might have legally. And like I mentioned also earlier, we do offer the consent removal option. So people are able to remove their consent from a story if they feel like they no longer would like you to tell it. Couple other features. But the content that is submitted to MemoryFox is yours. It's always owned by you. That is our privacy feature. We never own your content, unlike some social media platforms, for example. In terms of accessibility, MemoryFox you can use on your phone, your desktop, your tablet. So really it's accessible for people to share their stories where and when they are comfortable using the device that they're most comfortable on. And finally, everything about the way the collection process and the organization process and the sharing process works is customizable. So that is an ethical storytelling feature because that means that you get to use your community's preferred strength-based language wherever you need to have that language in order for them to feel the most comfortable to share their stories with you. So obviously that was my very quick overview of MemoryFox. I'm so glad that some of you stuck around. It's nice to see some friendly faces and some recurring people in the chat. And thank you all for coming today. If you do want to connect with one of our storytelling experts, you can scan that QR code or go to memoryfox.io/demo. And we would love to, set up a time to chat with you about your ethical storytelling goals, about the videos and photos that you have at your disposal, about all the stories that you really can capture and that will help you raise more funds. So thank you all for coming. And I'm going to wrap it up. I will hopefully see some of you at our next event, which we are doing an Ask Allie Anything event. Allie is a nonprofit attorney who joined us on a panel last month, and she really has some great insights. So please join us for Ask Allie Anything, and enjoy the rest of your week.